This is Green Street, the Environmental Health Show, greenstreetnews.org, Patti and Doug Wood, and our worldwide network of experts here every week to keep you up to date on what you need to know to keep yourself and your family safe and healthy in this increasingly toxic world. Welcome back. We all know the saying, you are what you eat, and we've talked a lot on this show about how that is literally true. But these days it can also be said that you are what you wear, at least if you tend to wear clothes made of some kind of synthetic fiber. That's because as you wear them and wash them, the plastic fibers that make up those clothes actually wear away into the air and water, where eventually they end up in our lungs, our food, our water, our rivers and streams, the ocean. Well, you get the idea. Today on Green Street, we'll talk with a scientific researcher who's been studying these tiny plastic fibers and ways to mitigate the damage they are doing. And we'll hear from Dr. Lisa Erdle right after some of the news headlines of the week. Patti, what do you got for us this week?
Well, I'd like to talk about this op-ed that was written for USA Today. The headline is, Affordability in New York Requires Leadership, Not Fossil Fuels.
This is the one by Ashil Gupta that I saw?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Affordability is unmistakably the dominant theme of today's political zeitgeist. The fossil fuel industry and its affiliated business groups, with their well-oiled propaganda machine and vast lobbying resources, have used the affordability argument to convince Governor Kathy Hochul to stop New York's progress toward a clean, sustainable, and ultimately more affordable energy future. Echoing industry buzzwords like affordability and reliability, the Hochul administration has halted the implementation of New York's landmark climate law, green-lighted massive fracked gas pipeline and energy-intensive cryptocurrency projects, canceled clean electricity transmission projects, abruptly suspended building codes for new construction without fossil fuels, and advanced a state energy plan to burn costly, polluting oil and gas, largely unabated for decades. What is going on?
New York was like way ahead of everybody with this climate protection law.
Leader.
No more.
None of these actions actually foster affordability. On the contrary, by bolstering our dependence on fossil fuels, they set the stage for a costlier and more uncertain energy future. Fossil fuels have hidden costs that are paid through higher healthcare spending, missed workdays, and lower quality of life. Communities near power plants, major roadways, and gas infrastructure bear higher rates of asthma, heart disease, and other pollution-related illnesses.
Yep.
New York leads the nation in pollution from heating homes and buildings with fossil fuels.
Really? Good
So
Lord.
what are we doing here?
I have no idea.
President Donald Trump's vindictive attacks on clean energy are already resulting in nationwide job losses, disinvestments, and predictions of higher electricity bills. But even though current federal energy policy presents challenges, states have tools to mitigate its impacts.
If they use them.
If they use them.
Well, it's a money game. In Washington, in Albany, in Sacramento, in all state capitals, it's just about the money. I hate to say that, but that's the way it shakes out. Okay, I have a news item here about the Trump administration proposing a new rule aimed at speeding up and streamlining the permitting process for large energy and infrastructure projects, including oil and gas pipelines and facilities tied to artificial intelligence. The rule, which does not require action by Congress, includes a suite of procedural changes to Section 401 of the Clean Water Act, a law enacted in the 1970s that is the primary federal statute governing water pollution in the United States. For decades, Section 401 has granted states and tribes the authority to approve, impose conditions on, or reject federal permits for projects they determine will pollute or damage local waterways. But not anymore. The Trump administration plans to scale back that authority in order to expedite projects and, quote, unleash energy dominance, unquote, according to the EPA. Again, quoting, this proposed rule will ensure that states and tribes only utilize Section 401 for its statutory purpose to protect water quality and not use it as a weapon to shut down projects, unquote. Administration claims that Section 401 has allowed major energy projects to stall unnecessarily, calling the current system fundamentally flawed. Implementation problems have led to lengthy certification timelines that are, quote, bad for business. Bad
Wow.
for who cares
Wow.
about the
Okay.
environment? They're bad for business.
Right.
The proposal would further limit state authority over water still covered by the Clean Water Act, a shrinking category after the Supreme Court's 2023 Sackett decision. That's the one, remember, the couple wanted to build on a wetland? And later efforts by EPA and the Army Corps to narrow which waterways qualify for federal protection. As a result, states could lose the ability to use Section 401 to protect many smaller streams, wetlands, and headwaters within their borders, leaving state regulators powerless to block or place conditions on federally permitted projects that could damage those waters, even if they are vital to local drinking water supplies, fisheries, recreation, or flood control. This is all about taking power away from local authorities. They're doing the same thing with the antennas, these cell antennas where the FCC has decided
Taking
to pass.
away all local
taking
control.
away all. We
Yep.
want to get rid of local control. Get these local people out of our way. We want to decide in Washington. In fact, we want the president to be able to decide which projects we're going to do and which projects we're not.
I have some good news.
Good. What do you got?
It's also about energy.
Okay.
Heat pumps for New England.
Okay.
New England winters can get wicked cold.
Yeah, no
and that's
kidding.
why 5 states in the region have joined together to launch a $450 million effort to use energy-efficient, low-emission heat pumps to warm homes in the region instead of burning fossil fuels.
Heat pumps is the way.
The New England Heat Pump Accelerator Project is a collaboration between Connecticut, Maine, Massachusetts, New Hampshire, and Rhode Island. Where's Vermont?
I was going to ask you, wait a minute.
The accelerator's launch marks a rare milestone for a Biden-era climate initiative, given the Trump administration's relentless attempts to scrap federal clean energy and environmental programs,
Yeah, I thought
as you just mentioned.
Yeah.
New England is a rich target for energy-saving projects because of its current dependence on fossil fuel heating. Natural gas and propane are in wide use, and heating oil is still widespread throughout the region. More than half of Maine's homes are heated by oil, and the other coalition states all use oil at rates much higher than the national average. The prevalence of oil in particular means there's plenty of opportunity to grow heat pump adoption, cut emissions, and lower residents' energy bills.
Heat pumps is it, baby, I'm telling you.
100%. At the same time, heat pumps have faced barriers in the region, including the upfront cost of equipment, New England's high price of electricity, and misconceptions about heat pumps' ability to work in cold weather. They do.
Absolutely.
The Accelerator Project aims to speed up adoption by supporting the installation of some 580,000 residential heat pumps, which would reduce carbon emissions by 2.5 million metric tons by 2030, the equivalent of taking more than 540,000 gas-powered passenger vehicles off the road.
I'm telling you.
This is the good news.
Yeah, it is good news. I'm glad to see it.
Congratulations, Connecticut, for moving this thing to the point where they're adopting it and going forward.
Yeah. Finally, some good news.
Yeah.
All right. Thanks, Patty.
You're welcome. Fast fashion has become ingrained in our culture. Mass-producing cheap, trendy clothing out of synthetic, that is plastic, fibers is a very lucrative business, but the environmental cost and human health costs are beginning to really add up. What scientists around the world are rapidly discovering is that as these cheap synthetic garments are worn and washed, the fibers they are made from are showing up all over our environment, in the air we breathe, the water we drink, and even in the food we eat.
That's right. The lunch you just ate, or the water bottle on your desk, or the breath you just took could possibly contain tiny plastic fibers from that acrylic sweater, that polyester training outfit, or that fleece scarf you threw out last season. Dr. Lisa Erdle is the Director of Science and Innovation at Gyres. Trained as a biologist and ecotoxicologist, Lisa has published her work in several of the leading scientific journals. Patti and I had the opportunity to speak with Lisa Erdle a few weeks ago, and we started out asking her to tell us a little bit about the organization Gyres. Here's our interview with Dr. Lisa Erdle.
We've been around for about 15 years now, first researching the issue of plastic pollution in the oceans. At the time, there wasn't really a lot of science about what kind of plastic was in the environment. It was a mythology about a floating island of trash in the middle of the oceans. And as our research has improved and we've gone down to smaller and smaller size fractions, we have really discovered that it's not a floating island of trash twice the size of Texas. It's a smog of the sea. Most of the plastic that's in the environment are these small microplastics, these plastics less than 5 millimeters in size. And a lot of our research is documenting what kind of plastic is in the environment and where it's coming from so we can find solutions. So just like not all pesticides are the same, not all microplastics are the same. They're hundreds of different polymers, thousands of different chemical additives, and they come from very different sources. And a solution for fragments of fishing gear is very different from microfibers that shed from our textiles or plastics that fragment from single-use plastic. So we document the kind of plastic that's in the environment and try to find solutions. My training is as an ecotoxicologist. So I did my PhD looking at how plastic and chemicals are impacting wildlife. And really, it comes down to trying to minimize the amount of exposure and how much plastic is getting into the environment.
And into our bodies.
And into us, yeah. Not to be scary, but we are ingesting and breathing in lots of plastic. Probably our biggest route of exposure is through the air. Many of these small microplastics are so lightweight that they can travel really far distances and they can remain in the air. And some of the most common particles that we're finding in the human body, whether it's the placenta or the liver, the bloodstream, the lungs, are these small microfibers, these fibers that come from textiles. And these fibers, they are often plastic. More than 60% of the clothes that we wear are synthetic. Think polyester, nylon, elastane. These are microplastics when they are shed from textiles, and contain a whole bunch of chemicals. They're really a unique cocktail of chemicals when you consider all the additives, all the dyes, all the finishing agents that give textiles different properties like waterproof resistance and stain resistance, different colors. So these fibers, when they're getting into us, they're not only causing these physical effects, but they can leach chemicals that also cause negative effects.
Yikes. So I would love to just talk about these gyres, since that was your specialty, was going into the oceans and discovering what you found.
So for the ocean gyres, we see a lot of these microplastics. There are some macroplastics too, like some large fishing nets, these ghost fishing gear that will continue to trap fish and fish even once these nets are discarded or accidentally lost. But the majority are these microplastics that are broken down from larger items. Once they're in the environment, they're nearly impossible to clean up. So really the solutions are trying to prevent this plastic from getting into the environment in the first place. And for some of the most common microplastics that we see in the environment, these fibers from textiles, we do have great solutions to capture them before they are released to the environment. It's only an issue that we've really known about for a decade or so. For microfibers, even
Yeah.
shorter. These are really, really small particles that are a fraction of the size of a human hair in their smallest dimension. And our early research methods, when we were using nets and trawling the surface of the oceans, we were using a mesh size that was too big to even capture these fibers that are shedding from our textiles. So we didn't even really know that they were there until about a decade or so ago. And we've been really quick to respond to the problem, both capturing these microfibers from washing machines, from dryers, innovating textile design so they shed fewer fibers. The difference between a high shed and a low shed textile in terms of fibers can be about 580 times. So there's a lot
Wow.
that can be done, a lot of solutions, and it's really exciting that people have started to understand the scale of the problem, and that has translated directly into finding solutions.
So I think you did some research on washing machines and the kind of filters that could go on there. I was kind of depressed a few months ago when I saw that Governor Newsom had vetoed the bill that would have required these filters on washing machines. Where are we on terms of those filters, bringing the cost down, making them mandatory?
So we did research in a couple different ways. So we first did research in the lab, found that a microfiber filter on a washing machine can reduce the amount of emissions by about 90%. So these are really effective. The smaller size mesh, the more fibers that you capture. We then scaled that up and put these filters in people's homes. So a research study, we put filters in about 10% of people's homes that were in a small town connected to a wastewater treatment plant. We put them in everyone's homes. Everyone flicked them on the same day, and we measured the fibers that were in the final treated effluent at the wastewater treatment plant. We looked at the fibers both before and after people turned on the filters, and we saw a significant decrease of microfibers that were going directly into the waterways once people had these filters in their homes. So they work when we study them in the lab. They also work at
In the
scale.
field, yeah.
And one challenge that we encountered when we did this a few years ago is that these filters can be kind of bulky or cumbersome to empty out. About a quarter of the people that wanted to participate in this pilot, they couldn't because they maybe didn't have room to access the effluent from their washing machine, or it was behind a piece of drywall, or they were renters and they couldn't tinker with all the plumbing. So the logical next step is to have these filters just automatically built in. Like we already have lint traps in our dryers. Why not have a
Sure.
lint trap in our washing machine as well? And this bill that was introduced in California, AB 1628, would require all new washing machines to have a filter automatically built in. It is more cost effective to have it built in than to have an external device, because if you're going to install a filter, it's a great way to retrofit an existing machine, but the devices, they market for around $150, and then you might have to pay a plumber unless you're super duper handy and can do all the plumbing yourself. But it's more cost effective to have them just built in, maybe around $10 to $20 to just build these filters into the washing machines. So there's a federal bill that would do the same. California often passes environmental policies and the rest of the world pays attention. So it was vetoed from the governor, but could be reintroduced in another state. Another state might lead the way, or it might happen at the federal level. But it really makes sense to try to just capture these fibers closer to the source.
So let me just ask you a question. Does it require the homeowner to actually clean out the filters periodically?
Yeah, so for the washing machine, a lot of the devices, you'd either scoop out sort of like a wet lint and toss it in the trash. Other devices, they almost like press out like a little puck of fibers. So it would collect the lint and drain out all the water. And then you've got sort of like a little disc of the lint. And then for dryers, we know that the filters on our lint traps are quite coarse. A majority of the small fibers can escape that primary lint trap. And a finer mesh or a secondary trap could capture those finer fibers, because those are some of the particles that we're seeing, like in human lungs. And many folks listening might be aware of seeing, clogs of lint by the exhaust of their dryers in their homes, or seeing lint on the bushes near where things are vented outside. And that lint is fibers. In a small little thimble-sized bit of lint, you can find hundreds or thousands of individual fibers.
Has anybody like me suggested that it shouldn't be the consumers who have to be paying for this? I know in New York, we're trying to pass some sort of a manufacturer's responsibility to take care of their plastic products and reduce the amount of plastic trash. But was that ever suggested that these filters are something that the plastic industry, the multi-billion-dollar plastic industry, ought to be at least subsidizing in some way?
Yeah, and there's been so much attention put on washing machines and dryers and the manufacturers. They're not the ones that are necessarily causing the problem. It's the clothing that we wear and the predominance of plastics and other textiles that have lots of different dyes and chemicals. So it is really, comes down to the clothing that we wear, the types of clothing that we wear. New clothing sheds way more microfibers than used. So when we wash it, a large majority of the emissions are coming out in the first several washes. Poorly constructed clothing sheds more microfibers. So fast fashion is a big culprit when we're talking about the microfiber issue. And there really should be responsibility by the producers who are making these and causing, this pervasive pollution problem.
But that becomes a economic problem, because people who don't have the means to purchase cotton and linen and wool and hemp and so on, these natural fibers, they're going to buy synthetic clothing because it's cheap.
Mm-hmm.
So this is a real problem, huh?
Cheap, but doesn't always last.
Yeah, I agree. The fast fashion industry has got to address this. I don't know how, but I had another question about the filtration, and that I know that you're looking at this on the customer level, but has there been any effort to work on the wastewater treatment plants? Is there a way for them to actually filter some of these things out on a bigger scale?
Yeah, so they already do filter out a lot of these microplastics at scale. A challenge, though, is that most of the fibers are caught in the initial filtration where the sewage sludge is captured. And this is a very nutrient-rich sludge and is used as a fertilizer in agriculture. So when the sludge is applied on land, you're taking all of the microplastics that are shed from our homes, from our laundry, and are going into waste streams, and then just diverting it and putting it into agricultural zones where it can enter into the soil or run off into the rivers. But at that initial filtration step, you are capturing the majority of fibers. Some sort of slip through that filtration and then are passing through all the primary and secondary filtration steps at a wastewater treatment plant. But yeah, the reality is that it kind of just gets captured and then moves somewhere else.
Yeah. How much can you tell our listeners about how, if it is applied to agricultural lands, the plants are being affected? Are they actually taking up those microplastics into the plant?
Some of the smallest microplastics, there is some evidence that plants can take those up when it's mixed in with the water. And these plastics, though, they will break down into smaller and smaller sizes as they're there for long periods of time. And we have had synthetic clothing for decades. It's actually used as a tracer by other researchers. If they look into the soil and they see a lot of these microfibers from textiles, from our clothing, those researchers know that land had been a net sink of the sewage sludge. So it's almost used as like a tracer. When researchers find these fibers, they can look for heavy metals or pharmaceuticals and other contaminants that are passing through wastewater treatment plants, because these fibers are so persistent. So when researchers don't know if that land had ever been a receiver of sewage sludge, they look for these fibers and often can find out those.
Really? That's the fingerprint, huh? Interesting.
Yeah. Some of the first research on this was done at the University of New Mexico, looking at the amount of plastics in placentas, right? Because a placenta is only 8 months old. And so it's a relatively young organ forever. And they're finding plastic in placentas.
Yeah, and on the maternal and the fetal side, that these are very small particles that they can permeate different tissues, and they can move within the body or move within tissue and other animals too.
We've talked a lot about textiles, but I keep reading about tires being a major source of these plastics, and it would be, I think, interesting for our listeners to hear about the that source and what can be done about that, if anything.
Yeah, so several years ago, we published a study with the San Francisco Bay Estuary Institute and the University of Toronto. It was at the time, and I think still is, the largest study of its kind that was mapping different compartments of San Francisco Bay. So all over the bay, we looked at surface water, subsurface water, sediment, multiple species of fish, stormwater, wastewater, and it really gave a whole picture of what kind of microplastics were in San Francisco Bay. Microfibers were the most common particle type across all samples, and one of the next most common types of plastic that we saw was rubber from car tires. A lot of it is really heavy, so will sink down and end up in the sediment. We don't often see in our environmental samples as much rubber that's floating because it's so heavy. And these particles have a lot of different chemicals. One of the chemicals, it's got benzenes and things that are quite toxic, and also have 6 ppd, and that chemical, it creates hardness for the tire, but it transforms into a chemical 6 ppd quinone, and that has really been the smoking gun for salmon die-offs across the Pacific Northwest. It is I believe, most toxic chemical that's known to impact salmon. So all sort of salmon and trout species are very, very sensitive to this chemical. Unfortunately, we don't have a lot of great replacements for this chemical, but when we use old car tires and grind them up and use them in playgrounds, that surface, while it's like spongy and really fun to play on, it sheds these really small particles, and even just the water, as it moves through it, that water becomes quite toxic, and quite toxic for kids who are playing on it. When you have car tires, and cars are getting heavier with electric vehicles, so the tires are wearing more quickly. You have this fine dust that is either up in the air or is on the sides of roads and can enter into water bodies when it rains. A solution that we have tested is, rain gardens, any sort of way to just filter out stormwater. That can be an effective way to capture these particles before going to the environment. And a lot of new solutions are being piloted. There's a startup that is creating a little sort of vacuum device to vacuum up the dust from like a moving car, and regular street sweeping. That also seems to be pretty effective at capturing these particles. But often in cities and rivers near cities, it's often the most common, or one of the most common microplastics that we see.
So, Lisa, I got to ask you, are you optimistic now? I mean, Five Gyres is doing some terrific work here to get the word out and letting the public know. When you wake up and when you look at your new baby girl, are you optimistic for the future?
I am optimistic for the future. It can become so overwhelming and feel like doom and gloom when we look at the issue of plastics as this monolith. Like, how do you solve plastics? We use it in so many parts of our lives. But when you start to really break it down by different sectors of how we use plastic and how we have alternatives, it becomes much more manageable. And just the issue of microfibers, they weren't discovered in the environment until 2011, when researchers were looking at a sewage outflow and finding the same sort of plastic types in the particles they were finding on the beach, and thinking, oh, these are the same sorts of plastic that we use in our clothing. So we've only known about the issue for less than a decade and a half, and we already have lots of solutions. These washing machine filters that can capture 90%. We did a study following up where we recently published a couple weeks ago, where secondary dryer filters can capture 80% of these finer microfibers that escape the lint trap. So we're seeing textiles that are being designed that shed fewer fibers. A lot of brands are really activating and trying to improve their own textiles, especially a lot of outdoor brands. They're really the leaders in this space. So I am really hopeful. And I think that we can understand the problem. And if you have people who are really dedicated to trying to solve it, and that's what we're seeing with this issue around textiles and fibers, I think we can solve it. And it's not too late to act. And I think it's something that we can, in the next 15 years, maybe solve altogether.
Dr. Lisa Erdle, Director of Science and Innovation at Five Gyres, talking about microfibers in our environment and what can be done about them. You can learn more about the Five Gyres organization and their great work at fivegyres.org. That's the number 5, GYRES.org. That's going to do it for our Green Street Show today. Special thanks to Dr. Katie Erdle and all of you who listen to and support this show. Patti and I will be back next week with another edition of Green Street. Thanks so much for listening.